it's a delight to have Jyoti with us, not least because we've been having all sorts of problems getting a hold of him on Teams in the background. But it's a pleasure to have Jyoti. He's the co-founder of North Star Transition, which is an organisation seeking to accelerate systemic change. He was part of the team that created the integrated reporting movement globally, and he's also been an impact investor for over 2 decades, as well as being an entrepreneur in the tech sector. So he has some fantastic insights, and we look forward to hearing your talk, Jyoti.
Excellent. Darren, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jyoti, yes.
Okay, and can you see us? Can you see the slides come up?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a fascinating involvement to discuss with a team of scientists like yours how you see the world, and you see the world as a system. And it was through engagements with folks like you that I started asking the question, can a business be regenerative? And this proved to be a really important question as we were asking some other questions around. And I want to walk you through a couple of the questions we were asking before I answer this question about can a business be regenerative? The starter question for us really was this: we know so much about what's going wrong. We know so much about what's going wrong when it comes to climate change, when it comes to biodiversity loss, when it comes to the social inequalities that we face. You could ask the question, why do we do so little? And I know within this group, there will be many who say, what do you mean? Why do we do so little? We're doing everything we possibly can. And yet, for me, I look at the carbon number, for example, that comes up on this chart, and I'd like to ask the question, so where on this chart are the impacts of the work that we're all involved in? You know, we can say we're doing masses of things. There are thousands of initiatives across the world to deal with carbon, for example. And yet, where is the evidence of that? Right now, it just looks as if we're going up, the graph is just rising in a straight line. And if we were to continue in, extending the forecast, that number just keeps going up and up and up. And so I guess the follow-on question is, even when we're acting, why is it that our actions seem so unimpactful? And I don't want to minimize in any way the actions that are being taken around the world, and especially in business around the world, governments around the world. Just they're seeking to do something to change how the world works. Why does it seem that our actions are so unimpactful? And we have a hypothesis at North Star Transition. And I'm going to read out that hypothesis to you because for us it's significant. You know, pretty much all the words in there are significant. It says the human system draped across planet Earth is a collection of interconnected, discrete, sector-specific subsystems, whether you think of those systems being finance or food or energy, transport, whatever it is. These systems are tightly woven together across the world. And it's because they are so interconnected, it means that they collaborate. These systems collaborate in ways that have a planet-wide impact. But it also makes these systems highly resistant to change. You can't intervene in any one sector and affect a system-wide direction change. So I think of a great big ball, it's like a transparent ball of plastic, and it's racing down the road. And inside this great big ball are lots of little balls. And those little balls are us and the systems we have and the initiatives we carry out. And I've been involved over the years with impact investing, where we're seeking to do something that has a positive impact in the communities. I've been involved in the development of integrated reporting. And today, more than 2,000 listed companies across the world are using the integrated reporting framework in some way or the other. And yet, when I think of this great big ball that's flying down the road, it's flying in a direction that we don't want to go in. We think that the outcome is going to be really bad. And in our little balls inside the big ball, we are desperate to change the direction of that big ball. And so we are racing like mad to move the ball in another direction. And yet somehow what we're doing doesn't change direction at all. The system continues to fly down the road as it has ever been. And we have to ask ourselves the question, is there another way to change the direction of the ball? Is there another way that we can change how these systems work? And so that's really my interest. And that's the focus that that I have at North Star Transition, to try and see if we can get systems to change how they function. And I'm really curious about how a talk of this sort will go down in amongst your group, which is a group of scientists who think a lot about systems. You know, we in business are probably at the infant stage when it comes to thinking in systems terms, but you folks are used to it. So I want to just share a few ideas just to see how you fare with them. And the first question I want to ask is, how does business work? We know that business largely is what has caused the sort of planet scale impacts that we were talking about, you know, whether it is biodiversity loss, whether it is climate change, huge levels of inequality. So it's not unreasonable to ask the question, well, how does business work? Why does it create these sort of outcomes? So imagine that you are watching an industrial trawler scrape the ocean floor like a bulldozer. And there are quite a few of these trawlers at work at the moment. They just scrape the ocean floor, they pick everything up before them, and that's the way they are carrying out, I guess, fishing in some way. They take everything that's in their path. Now, it's easy perhaps to identify who owns that trawler. Who is it? Which business is carrying out the trawling? However, the impacts that we see are not just because there are some businesses that are acting really badly. It's not just that there are a few mining companies that have spoiled things. It's not just that a few petroleum companies have caused our world to be in the way they are, in the way it is. What we are seeing is the consequences of trillions of business decisions involving literally billions of humans. The individual fingerprints of each of us are not visible, but it's the collective action of all of us together that has brought our system to where it is. Now, for companies across the world, the gifts of nature are literally like free gifts, whether it's air or water, the fish in the sea that the industrial trawler is picking up, they're free gifts. The bounties of nature seem limitless. The assumption being that business decisions are not constrained in any way by the availability of natural resources. And that's kind of how business has worked for the last 50 years, particularly, certainly over the last 200 years. But we know this is not true. This is not a true reflection of how planet Earth works. The free gifts of nature are not some kind of bonus assets sitting on an accounting ledger, which we can use any way we want. We live in a resource constrained world, and the billions of business decisions we make daily are changing and reshaping this world that we live in. So I want to ask the question, if it's not just how business works that we need to be paying attention to, and we certainly do need to pay attention to it, and there are loads of businesses that think about sustainability issues, but my issue is that it's not enough to see an individual business making the decisions that it does. We have to see in the round, how do these things work? And one other factor that makes a big difference to the impacts that we're seeing is the work of finance. And so I'm going to ask a similar question. How does finance work? Finance is what provides the lubrication, if you like, for the working of the system. It enables companies to carry out the actions that they do. And I borrowed this slide from the folks at Thinking Ahead Institute, part of Willis Towers Watson, because for me, it's an interesting thing where they are identifying the links that occur inside the finance system. So for example, you start with end savers. All of us who have a pension fund or we've got a savings account in some way, we have put money away, and our hope is that that money will deliver some kind of return for us. And what happens is, especially if the money goes into a pension fund or into a long-term savings account, it goes into the hands of insurance companies and pension fund owners. And those organizations invest on our behalf with asset managers. They invite other financial institutions to come along and take responsibility for the money that is invested with them. And they give them certain things to think about. We want to make sure that these assets do achieve these sort of outcomes. And so the asset managers then go away and use the mandate that is given to them by the asset owners to make their investment decisions in companies, in governments, all that sort of stuff. And it's the actions of companies and governments that actually create the jobs and produce socially useful products, etc., but also create the negative outcomes. And in a way, it is the money that all of us put into the system that contributes to enabling companies to do the things that they do. So at one level, we could ask the question, what is it that companies are doing that's so harmful to our planet? At another level, we can ask, who are the people who are enabling that to happen? Now, the challenge we have is that as end savers, we may say, well, I want to make sure that my money is not used for any harmful purpose. And many savers will say that, they don't want their money used on weapons of war. They don't want it used for tobacco, or increasingly people are asking questions about greenhouse gases. And of course, there are asset managers who are now being challenged by asset owners to use the phrase that Simeon used, which is ESG, environmental and social governance metrics, in driving their decisions. So let's get a sense of the scale of what we're talking about. Right now, there's about $90 trillion worth of money inside the capital market system. This is money that is invested in companies and in sovereign, in government debt and so on. Now, if you said, well, we don't just want the 90 trillion that goes after just getting a financial return. We want to be more responsible for that. And so let's go with stuff that has an ESG factor in the decision making. So whenever the investment decision is made, some kind of regard is given for environmental and social stuff. Well, if we are generous with the definitions, we can say that about a third of the market, so around $30 trillion at the moment, uses some kind of ESG factor. But usually what it is that the ESG factor is a kind of first level filter. Should we consider this company or not? And if the ESG score is really bad, okay, we'll leave them out. But if it's fine, then we go back to making a decision based on the usual stuff, which is, and how much money can we earn from it? That's pretty much how investors tell me they work. But let's say, actually, we're interested in those investors who are even more intentional than that. They are seeking to drive a different outcome, whether it's in terms of environmental factors, whether they're seeking a particular warming, temperature warming on their portfolio, and they're saying we don't want just extravagant warming, we want to try and control the warming down to Paris levels or anything like that. Those sort of investors could be called impact investors. And today, again, if we're being very generous, we could say about 1 trillion or around 1% of the overall capital market does this. It's still a big number because capital markets are so big, but it's only about $1 trillion. And if we were to ask the question, is that 1 trillion actually making an impact? So I want to ask the question from another perspective, which is, what if the entire 90 trillion was used to create impacts that were positive for environmental and social benefits, and which use this kind of impact idea in the way they worked? Would it help us do anything different? Would the world look different? Would we solve the problems that we have today just by changing the focus of investment from a financial focus to this sort of impact focus? And to help us understand that, I want to draw you to a few metrics that currently we struggle with when it comes to making investment decisions, and even companies struggle with this. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through some of these ideas. So, for example, regeneration. Pretty much all of the money that goes into capital markets today is funding a degenerative system, because we're looking around us and the system is falling apart. That's a degenerative system. How much is available to focus on regeneration? And actually, the answer is we don't know. In fact, I would venture to say probably next to nothing is being used towards regeneration at the moment, because we're not even sure what regeneration looks like. Now, I love the fact that when I'm in the community of biologists and scientists like yourself, you think hard about regeneration, how systems work. You think hard about issues like what makes a system healthy, what makes a system resilient. And when you join health and resilience together, it gives you a sense of whether this is a system that can regenerate itself, and can it operate when it's under attack, and so on. We don't have any of those sorts of ideas in business, and we need to be able to learn the kind of learnings that you have. And we need to bring that very rapidly into the thought process in business. We don't really focus on impact. Most businesses are focused on financial performance. Even when they look at ESG issues, it's often to do with if we use half the amount of carbon that our competitors using, that's a great result, not just because of the carbon. Actually, perhaps more importantly, it's a great result because it means we're using half the fuel that they are, and we're consuming less in terms of costs. So much of the ideas around environmental and social performance in business is usually about just having a more efficient business. It's not to do with having the kinds of impacts we might want to see in terms of how planet Earth works. We also struggle with understanding across our supply chains, what are the impacts we're having across ecosystems. Bioregional is just a new word that is beginning to gain some coverage in business ideas, but I've come across a mining company that was doing some really deep damage in Latin America. That's a Canadian mining company. And they thought, oh, wow, we're taking down forests in Latin America because of the work that we do. But we'll just grow a new forest back home, which is in Canada, without thinking through the issue that actually replacing a Latin American forest with a forest in Canada is not the same thing. We need to understand bioregional coverage in significant ways. And we also need to ask ourselves the question, are the businesses that we function in, what's the business model? How do they work? What are they seeking to achieve? So I want to ask the question, is it possible to aim for not just less harm? And in fact, I hear many businesses talk about sustainability as if we're just going to do less harmful things, because if we can do less harmful things, that'll be great. And I want to say to that, if we're going to do less harmful things, maybe we buy ourselves another 5 years, maybe we buy ourselves another 7 years, maybe 10 years before we have to really get into the reckoning on what happens with business. But I want to instead not ask businesses to do stuff that delivers less harm. I want to challenge them. What would regeneration look like? how can they be involved in regeneration? And what would be the metrics and issues that we need to track in their businesses so that we know whether they're actually delivering regeneration or not? In the phrase of Disney, they used to use the word Imagineering quite a lot. So you go to a Disney an attraction, and they would say it's closed for Imagineering. And by that, what they meant was it's closed so that they can imagine a great attraction, one that would really thrill us, and then they would engineer it. And they created this compound word called Imagineering. And for me, Imagineering is kind of where we now have to go. We can't do business as is, because that's a rubbish, broken model. We can't even do business as just a little bit less harmful than everybody else, because that only buys us a little bit more time, and then we're all done anyway. Instead, we need to ask ourselves, what does regeneration look like? And I want to learn from folks like you who think about regeneration all the time, but perhaps you don't think in business terms. And my invitation to you is to share what you know about how regeneration works. Help those of us in business and in finance to learn about these issues so that together we can actually imagine what the world could look like if we were thinking in regenerative terms, and then we could engineer that at a scale that would make a difference. So can a business be regenerative? Today, I don't believe the answer is yes, but my hope is that the answer can be yes in the future, thanks to the work that you folks do and collaborations with business. Thank you very much, Darren, for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing how the rest of the conference goes.
Oh, thank you so much, Jyoti. And sorry if there's any noise coming from my end. There's a deforestation project going on outside my window, much to my alarm. Just a couple of comments, Jyoti. And again, just for anybody attending, please put any questions that you have into the Q&A box. I think probably many people working in my world of biological systems and ecological networks in particular will sort of resonate with some of the terminology that you've used there in terms of, you talked about the attack tolerance of systems. You talked about complexity and sort of how that kind of leads to stability and resilience. And these are all sort of terms that we're constantly using within network ecology. So it's really good to sort of begin to sort of, I suppose, find the same language and terminology and find spaces where we can sort of talk more about these things. So that's my sort of first observation, and I'm sure many other people listening in are joining up the dots. And the second, really, I suppose, is more of a question of, it's really putting you on the spot, because I suppose it goes back to the point you made about metric shortfalls. And actually, you know, what is the sort of biological metrics that we're looking for in terms of this sort of regeneration that you're imagining here as well? I mean, we know, for example, that there's a lot of work going on around, you know, biodiversity offsetting. So, you know, offsetting the impact of any commercial development by, you know, planting up a new nature reserve somewhere else, for example, and that sits really uneasy with a lot of ecologists, and you've already alluded to that in terms of the value of a Atlantic rainforest for its biodiversity value compared to a Canadian one, for example. So I don't know if you could sort of perhaps give us a bit of a steer towards what we are looking for here. Is it about improvements in the ways in which ecosystems function, for example?
Okay, so you're asking questions that perhaps I'm not equipped to answer, but I'm going to, you know, have a go anyway, seeing that you've invited me to join this call. If you think about data, business loves data. investors love data. And I was speaking to the president of the CFA Institute, which is one of the leading institutes for financial analysts. And she was saying that in the last 2 years, we have collected more data on business, on sustainability metrics, than we have ever had before altogether. So we have loads more information than ever before. And my response to that is, and somehow we seem to know even less than we ever did, because we have 700 bits of data about a particular company that investors can use in understanding what the company is doing, what its impacts are, et cetera, et cetera. And we still cannot answer, is this a company that's contributing to the degenerative world we live in or not? And maybe it's making, progress in this area or that area, but the progress that we see in individual initiatives just get completely absorbed by the overall system that is driving down this road, and it has got a horrible end coming. So for me, I'm not impressed by even more data, because I don't get any meaning that I can derive from that data. What I want is understanding. How does the system work? What are the key factors that drive life in that system? And how is it that this company that I'm looking at to invest in is contributing to that life, to the health and resilience of that system? Or are they damaging it? And right now, most of the companies that I've ever engaged with, and I've had the privilege and opportunity to engage with some of the greatest companies around the world, I would say pretty much all of them are degenerative because they're damaging life. So we need to learn the kind of language that you guys talk about. And perhaps I'm an imposter in using your language because I'm borrowing words like regeneration and I'm borrowing words like health and resilience of living systems. But it's because it feels to me that if we don't do that, we're just going to be stuck trying to come up with some little silo answer to a problem that is not going to address the bigger, wider issue that we've got. Across Europe, when I go and talk to the European Commission, and they'll tell me about, we've got this great hydrogen initiative that is going to be amazing in terms of renewable power. Zero carbon power. And it's like, yeah, but who cares? It's only hydrogen experts who are getting together. They're not going to solve the world's problem. We have to actually reconfigure how the world works, because right now it's configured for a carbon world. We have to think of a new way of doing it. And so I'm not sure it's just about metrics, but I think metrics will play a big role. And finance people love metrics anyway, because they can shove them into models and do very fancy, inordinately complex things, most of which are not true anyway, but they love the idea that they can do it. So bring on the metrics. I'm sure they'll go down well, but let's focus on metrics that actually make a difference to life.
Thank you. And just to add, I think we all feel like imposters with this particular global challenge. So we're all in good company. Just from the attendees, there's just some general points again, just emphasising the sort of the notions of stability and vulnerability is kind of central to a lot of people working on ecological networks, for example. But there's also a tremendous sort of focus, I think, on restoration in particular, and how we might use approaches ecologically and I guess from your perspective regeneratively too. So that's just a general comment. And then if I may just ask one quick question. Somebody has asked, do you see any larger companies today that are working in the directions you put forward?
There are plenty of companies that are doing some things really well and in really interesting ways. So if you look at Unilever, if you look at Danone, these are companies that are doing, they understand the big challenge. they've got people, especially Danone has in Emmanuel Faber, someone you'd describe as an activist CEO. He wants to see the world changed, and he's doing everything he possibly can to get his business to contribute to that shift in the world. So, Horizon is the American dairy, organic dairy brand that Danone owns, and they have put in $15 million into Horizon 600 farmers to help those farmers learn how to be better farmers, to help Horizon and Danone meet their carbon negative goal, which is they want to be carbon negative by 2025. And so, they're putting in the money, they're helping the farmers do more in terms of organic practice. And these are farmers, if you're a supplier to Horizon, you're already an organic farmer. And yet Danone recognizes they have to do even more. So are there businesses that are doing more? Absolutely, there are. But I would say the whole of the Danone business is not a regenerative business. It's a degenerative business, and they recognize that. The whole of the Unilever business is not a regenerative business. It's a degenerative business, and we have caked into these businesses decades of how to do things the way we should do them. And then we've also brought in sustainability ideas, which is if we can do things a little bit better and use less carbon and produce less waste, somehow that's going to solve it. And for quite a few businesses, they're stuck in simply trying to do the sustainability thing. And I don't buy that at all, because I feel sustainability is not the regenerative thing. We have to learn how to be regenerative. And it's not the same thing. Just doing less bad is not the same thing. So I think we've got a way to go. But it's great that there are positive examples, because we can all build on the work that those positive examples are doing.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that's given lots of us plenty to think about. There's a couple of other questions which I'll just move on until a little bit later on. But otherwise, thank you so much, Jyoti, for that. And I'll just move on to our next speaker now.
Thanks very much, Darren.